The Hard Rock Empire is on the air. We are back with a special early edition, not too early, just a couple of hours early for the Hard Rock Empire as it is WrestleMania weekend, and for some reason we're going to subject ourselves to another night of WrestleMania coming up and after night number one last night. But because of that, I want to move the music podcast up a couple of hours to get that in before we get to some wrestling later on tonight. But turns out we kind of shortened our week on a week where we had some really, really good music. It was a great week for releases and re-releases, and we're going to talk about all of that coming up on this edition of the Hard Rock Empire. Joining me in studio, my fellow glutton for punishment of WrestleMania weekend, as always, it's Mike. Mike, how's it going?
It's going. Yeah, a lot going on this weekend. Not only WrestleMania, but yesterday was also Record Store Day.
Yeah.
We didn't really get a chance to talk about it beforehand, but there wasn't a whole lot that I was really eyeing as far as releases. I mean, there are things I probably could have dumped money on, but I think it was like an Alcatraz album that would have been kind of cool. The one I was kind of looking for was Megadeth re-releasing Hidden Treasures as an LP. I think that's one that will be available post-Record Store Day eventually, so I'm not too worried about it. But, you know, I did check out somewhat local record store in Milford, Spiral Groove Records. Cool store, definitely worth checking out. Picked up the King Crimson album that I talked about a few weeks back. Picked up a vinyl copy of Rust in Peace because I didn't own it on record, so kind of excited about that. And picked up a random Kansas album that was like $5 used. So let's see which one. Audio Visions from 1980. So I'll have to check that out and see if that's any good.
It's kind of interesting because it felt like a few years ago Record Store Day was kind of dying out as you just didn't get the hype for it anymore for whatever reason. And then the active record releases have made such a strong comeback. I mean, we talk about it all the time, even these new bands. In fact, when I was looking up the album I chose this week, one of the first links that came up was their link on the Record Store Day website for their album. So it's, you know, there's so many bands have embraced releasing vinyl versions. For a while, it was just a super ultra uber collector's edition if you wanted to get the vinyl. Now it's, I don't want to say it's common, but it is far more common now, and it's, I think, injected life into Record Store Day again because you can obviously go back and get re-releases of old vinyl. You can find, you know, hidden treasures, and you can find new stuff that's out there that bands are putting out on vinyl, which is honestly pretty cool.
Yeah, and what's wild is like you kind of assume that there are the certain acts and bands that collectors are going to eye more than others, but I mean like the list from Record Store Day's website, that's stuff from all over the board, man. It's the Alcatraz one I mentioned, No Parole from Rock and Roll. But I mean, you got Aha, Analog 20th Anniversary. You got Baby Metal live at the O2 Arena. Let's see, Bluey, an album from Bluey. Just all sorts of stuff. The Cars, The Cure, Dinosaur Jr., Hilary Duff. I mean, if you're into some kind of music, there was probably something released on Record Store Day to kind of fill that void.
I think for a while it was almost exclusively like, oh, somebody sold their record collection. Let me go to the record store and see if I can find something that maybe I've always wanted. And now it's like these bands are just actively like, hey, 20th Anniversary Edition, 30th Anniversary Edition. Let's release a new record for this. And I think that's really cool. And I don't know that I expected this kind of a surge in the record industry. I think I would say even 5 to 10 years ago, I thought that was still very niche. Like, you know, it was almost hipster to some degree. Like you see the person who has the record player and like the fancy shelf that they can display the art on. And it's kind of come back mainstream again, which I think is awesome. And anything to get people into stores and buying new music again, I'm always going to be all for that.
Yeah, and that was why I really wanted to make the effort to find a record store that I could periodically go back to, and especially when I'm looking at all these older albums for the vault, I would like to own those on vinyl. I think that would be really cool. And it's funny, you mentioned kind of the hipster nature of it. There was kind of that source of pride when I took the records up to the cashier and he like noted the King Crimson one, like, oh, this is an amazing album. Almost like I passed some sort of test, like I picked what I was supposed to pick. But yeah, the store was pretty cool. They did have some really awful rap artists doing live music there, which I'm all for live music. Not a fan of rap, but it is what it is.
Sure.
You know, anything's an event, and yeah, I think you definitely got to support places like that. And physical media. I'm always a fan of physical media.
One thing, if you've not checked out, or maybe you're not really hip to Record Store Day here in the U.S., if you go to the Record Store Day website, at least the page I was looking at, it basically showed you where the closest record stores were to you. It would give you a list. So no matter where you are here in the U.S., because it's very possible there's a record store within 10 or 15-minute drive of you that maybe you've never visited before. That's the case, that one in Milford that Mike mentioned. So give that website a shot and, pick out a few albums that you want to own physically. You don't have to wait for Record Store Day. It's a really cool day to do it, but go check out and get some stuff on vinyl, like Mike said. Physical releases are always welcome, and we're happy to see bands embracing that more and more at a time where physical releases of visual media are going away. It's great that audio media just kind of seems to be filling that void and willing to step up and continue to give customers something tangible that they'll be able to hold on to.
And I think you want to see that pushback where it's, no, stop taking away my physical media. That's still how I want to consume things. We talk about it in the video game industry as far as game producers basically just taking away your ability to play a game, something that has an online-only feature. You bought the game, but months later, if it doesn't perform well, you may no longer own it because they don't support it. And it's stuff like that we as the consumers have to take back that power, I think.
Yeah, 100%. And the only way that's going to happen is to be loud and vocal about it and support, whether it's game producers, whether it's, DVD, video, movie producers, anime producers, music producers. Support the ones that are giving you the physical releases. Go out there and buy them, even if it's not something you're totally crazy about, just to make sure that they know, like, hey, if you put this out, I will buy it. So please continue to put this stuff out. So that's, you always, even today, you can still vote with your wallet. Yeah. I think that's an important distinction that you need to make, and no matter what physical media
I think it's kind of a two-front war, too. I think it's one thing to support the people who you think are doing it right, but I think also it's looking at your own spending and saying, hey, maybe I should stop rewarding all the streaming services with my business. Maybe I pick the one that's really irreplaceable, but maybe don't just mindlessly give money to the ones that are really doing a disservice to their customers.
And I think some of those companies know that the handwriting's on the wall, because so many of those streaming services now you can link through your cable subscription, like, oh, you can get Paramount Plus, and you can get this, and you can get that, and it's like they're realizing that at some point, and we've probably passed that point, that people are just like, enough is enough. Like, I can't subscribe to everything. I'm just going to have to miss out on some things because it's just not worth it to do all that. So it'll, like Mike said, you can vote both ways, and certainly encourage you to do that. We've got a big week of music this week. This is the music of March the 27th. Probably a good time for me to paste the playlist into the chat. Mike, of course, puts that together every week based off of some lists that list all the releases for a given date. And this week was really loaded. Honestly, this may be one of the heaviest weeks as far as quality releases we've had since, really since the beginning of the year. I think it was an outstanding week, and there was a lot of re-releases, and there were just interesting releases that again, maybe we wouldn't pick, but are worth spotlighting. So I know as we get to that segment to start, before we get to the two albums that we picked, it's going to be pretty lengthy discussion this week, because there was a lot of really interesting stuff on the playlist. And again, I can't encourage you enough to go through and check it out, because I think you're going to find a lot that you're going to like this week, because I thought this was one of the stronger weeks we've had all year.
It's bad. I feel like I'm not finished with it yet.
Yeah,
I feel like I need to go back and revisit it, because there are things still kind of left on the table.
Yeah.
But as far as kind of the major or more notable of releases for this week, we got a new one from Black Label Society, Engines of Demolition. That's the 12th studio album from Zakk Wylde and company. One that, what I've heard of it is amazing, and I feel like all bands should have an album like this. The German power metal band Iron Savior released Awesome Anthems of the Galaxy, a covers album. I love covers, big fan of that. I think anytime a band can kind of show you what maybe has influenced them, especially if it's not metal, it's kind of out there, I'm all about it. And the track list for this one's just absolutely stellar.
Yeah.
I mean, you got Fame and What a Feeling from Irene Cara. All I Need Is a Miracle, Mike and the Mechanics. Maniac, Michael Cimbello. Take on Me, Aha. Relax, Frankie Goes to Hollywood. Against All Odds, Phil Collins. One of the best songs ever written.
That's a great song.
Be real. Separate Ways, Journey. Here Comes the Rain Again, Your Rhythmics. She's Like the Wind, Patrick Swayze. I Just Died in Your Arms Tonight, Cutting Crew, Forever Young, Alphaville, Since You've Been Gone, Russ Ballard. Also notably covered by Rainbow back in the day as well.
Yeah.
Call Me from Blondie. Not what you'd expect a power metal band to pick necessarily, but man, just some outstanding covers.
Yeah, what I've heard of that is already really good. That's one of a handful of albums I need to go back and listen to in its entirety this week because there just wasn't enough time to get through all the good stuff, which is a good problem to have on the podcast. But there's even more.
Yeah, and they're a band that this is their 16th album, so they're a band that I need to go back and catch up with too. I mean, you can only follow so many power metal bands over the past 20 years. One of the surprises for me, and I need to go back and kind of ingest the whole thing. Lou Gramm released an album called Released. Classic singer of Foreigner, obviously, still periodically touring with them, I believe.
Yeah.
But what I heard of it, he sounds amazing.
He's 75. And you did bring up a good point. And again, you don't want to get to the point in your life that you just are skeptical of everything. But in this technology age of music, you just wonder, like, what is real and what is Memorex, if you will.
Yeah.
You know, it's because he does sound amazing. Like, he sounds like he could... Because the track on the playlist sounds like it could have been classic Foreigner from the 1980s, and it wouldn't have been out of place. It didn't feel like he was a step behind at all. Now, I've not gotten to listen to the whole album. I would like to do that probably in the next couple of days. And honestly, if it sounds as good as the playlist track, I'm probably going to pick that album up because Foreigner, for my money, I think is very underrated. For whatever reason, it feels like when you get into discussions of bands of that era, they don't get always the same level of love. But I think their best albums I'd put side by side with any of those AOR, arena rock groups of the 1970s and 1980s to be every bit as strong as the others.
I think some of those bands, I don't know if it's because they missed that short window prior to the arena rock thing happening. They don't get the same credibility that other bands who had been around a bit longer do.
Yeah.
Because I feel like, you have those bands like Foreigner, REO Speedwagon, Boston, who all just kind of get lumped in as like arena rock sellout kind of stuff instead of just hard rock bands.
Yeah.
But Foreigner's got some tremendous songs, and again, they're another band that I really want to go deeper into their catalog.
100%. They would definitely be up for the gimmick that I'm running right now, basically just going through and listening to all their albums. What else do we have this week?
Yeah, moving on. We have Myrath with their newest album, Wilderness of Mirrors. It's the 7th studio album from the Tunisian progressive metal act, a band that we featured 2 years ago, I think now.
They're really good.
Really solid stuff. And one that I really enjoyed the album. I didn't pick it, but it's one that we were kind of clued into a few months back when they released a video that ended up being on this album. Power Paladin released Beyond the Reach of Enchantment. It's the second album from the Icelandic power metal band. Really good stuff. Obviously, if you're not familiar with these guys, check out the video for the song Sword Vigor. It is the most absurd thing and really... probably not super expensive to create, and I think it's kind of what I think the template should be for making a modern music video that doesn't involve AI.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Yeah, it didn't get a chance to listen to that whole album yet, but I know that the track that Mike mentioned I thought was amazing, and honestly, this is one of those weeks where we each probably could have picked 2 or 3 albums and would have probably still left things on the table because those guys definitely deserve a lot of credit for that album. The track was amazing.
We would have had to push the show back to like next Thursday, but we could have picked 2 or 3 albums.
Exactly right. We moved it up instead of moving it back, which made that a little more difficult.
Earlier we were talking about physical media, and I think one thing we are seeing too now is record companies going back and finding multiple albums from maybe a less known band and bringing them into the forefront and re-releasing them. And we've seen numerous instances of that this week. Steamhammer re-releasing 2 albums from the band Evil Dead. They're an American thrash metal band from Los Angeles. Couple albums from 1989 and 1991, Annihilation of Civilization and The Underworld. The band did get back together in 2016 and have released a couple new albums, but, an opportunity to maybe check in on one of those Bay Area bands that maybe just didn't quite reach the pinnacle. We also have John Anderson, legendary founder of Yes. Frontiers is re-releasing a couple of his albums from 1997, Earth, Mother Earth, and from 2011, Survival and Other Stories. I've not listened to much of his solo work, but I'm sure it's fantastic.
I've heard a little bit of his stuff. Obviously, he's been doing stuff with the Band Geeks, I think was the band he's been touring with. And, they've released, obviously, you hear all the Yes stuff, but there's also some other stuff. And what I've heard of it is unsurprisingly great. And he's another guy who is getting up there in age, but can still bring it vocally, which is really impressive because, a song like Roundabout is not exactly an easy vocal song, and the dude can still get there. So it's another just incredibly talented guy. That's another guy who's probably a bit underrated in the history of rock music.
Absolutely. And if you look on the Wikipedia for him, just to see the work he has put in over the years, not only with Yes, but everything else he's done, the dude has remained busy and just super prolific. It kind of makes me think when I'm doing this vault gimmick of going through, right now I'm on 1973, it's just some of the musicians that I'm getting exposed to that maybe I didn't listen to the first time around.
Yeah.
Just the amount of talent. It's like watching videos of Jethro Tull, and you're just like, these guys are brilliant.
Yeah. It's, we obviously grew up 10 years, well, probably 15 years too late to catch a lot of those, when they were really in their prime, when they were kind of breaking onto the scene. So a lot of those were kind of playing catch up on. But, the good news is a lot of their classic concerts and a lot of their classic albums have since been uploaded to YouTube. And so you can kind of go back and experience them for the first time. I had posted, Chicago, a video of theirs from 1970.
Yeah.
And it's just I couldn't imagine what people in 1970 would have thought of that because it was so out there and different and incredible. It's just, we take it for granted now, but it's, when you go back and look and you just kind of think what that must have been like to see a guy playing the flute in a rock band, and just jamming away at it. It's just on a totally different level.
It's amazing to me the quality of some of those videos.
Yeah.
And I don't know how much of that is upscaling, even
Some,
AI
I'm sure.
upscaling, but just some of those videos look amazing despite being 50 years old.
Yeah, they've done a good job. And some of them were probably shot on film. So that helps a lot if you were able to keep the film somewhere. You can basically go back and do a retransfer of the actual film version of it, which allows you to basically upscale it without having to use AI technology to do it. So
not as many cell phone videos from the 70s.
Surprisingly, no.
You have to run into any of those.
For sure.
It's weird.
Anything else before?
I just think concert goers were more respectful back then.
Yes, for sure.
That's what it was. Another band, this being a British thrash band, Pariah, 3 of their albums from 88, 89, and 97 being re-released by Hammerheart. This band's still active. They've actually changed their name a couple times. They're now active under the name Satan, but you can get a hold of Pariah's The Kindred, Blaze of Obscurity, and Unity, those 3 albums being re-released. So, again, physical media must be doing well enough where it warrants going back and digging up some of this stuff and getting it in collectors' hands, and that's fantastic.
The other thing about that, too, is it's a chance to kind of refresh those masters and get them out on a new format, so hopefully they'll continue to last. And
preservation's a big deal.
It is, for sure. Anything else, or are we finally to the end?
Interesting names. We can move on to that.
We'll get to that. We got about 2 minutes before we have to take a break.
All right, we got Photorum. They are a death doom metal band from Denmark. They have their most recent album, Incongruous Forms of Ever-Growing Rot. I mean, incongruous is a great word. More bands should use that in their titles. We got Samurai Pizza Cats with Press Start. What I heard of that's pretty decent as well. They're a German metalcore band. Yeah, Samurai Pizza Cats, classic localization thing.
Not trademarked, evidently.
Apparently not. I think you can still get the physical copies of that show from Discotheque, but whatever. Okay. And finally, Sons of Butcher, the Skids EP. I didn't realize this was like an album put together by a Canadian adult animated comedy show.
Oh,
but
weird.
They're the ones that did the Bacon song.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, that's interesting.
Definitely wild stuff.
It is definitely wild stuff. You can check that out on the playlist. But yeah, we had so much stuff to talk about before we even got to the new bands that we actually, if you're on Twitch, We do actually have to take a commercial break before we get to the new music this week, which is unusual for us. We do have to run ads a couple times an hour. It's just required by Twitch. If you can stick around through those ads, it's just 90 seconds. Would help us out a lot. If otherwise, you can subscribe with your Prime, obviously, to not get those ads. If you're watching on YouTube, you're just going to hear us ramble. We've certainly done a lot of that in the first 25 minutes of the show. But we'll be back in about 90 seconds to get to the new music, the two bands that we did select this week. So please stick around for that. That'll be coming up on the other side of this break. And we have the ads getting ready to fire. Yeah, this, just a huge amount of stuff this week. And, obviously next week we get to the music, I believe, of April the 3rd as we move into the month of April. So it'll be interesting to see what that looks like and whether it can keep up, because it just felt like, and I don't know how much of all these re-releases were set to be timed to get them out before Record Store Day rolled around, but it does kind of feel like, and I do wonder if the next couple of weeks of the show, as we catch up to,
will also be
very, very, very re-release heavy. But it is great to see, because I think the more physical media we can get out there and the more this old stuff gets re-released and refreshed, it's a great way to kind of introduce a new generation to a lot of these old bands that you can't find hardly anywhere right now before they're re-released.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I enjoy most, is just stumbling into something that not only I haven't heard of, but no one I know has ever heard of. And maybe it's not quite up there with Metallica and Megadeth, but it's something that I can still really enjoy. And you're kind of getting a glimpse at a band that was trying to really break through, and who knows if they did, but it's cool to get a chance to revisit something like that it wasn't like a AAA release, essentially.
Obviously, one of the two bands we're going to be talking about this week is another one of these bands that has been around for a long time, and for whatever reason, it didn't quite work out the way they were hoping maybe the first time, or at least not to the same length, but have now reemerged and are doing very well, as we welcome back our Twitch audience to the show. And it's honestly, this was a crazy week for great music, and it's one of those weeks where as I said, we easily could have picked several albums, and encourage you to go through the playlist to pick your favorites. But alas, we have reduced it down to just two, and that's what we're going to talk about on this episode of the Hard Rock Empire. Mike and I each have an album for you to check out, and Mike will let you kick things off. And I really, really enjoyed this album you're going to talk about. Had a chance to listen to it today, and it's just another great one on the list. What do you got for us this week?
Yeah, by the time I got to the end of the playlist setting this thing up, I had gone through so many songs. It was good that I was still getting pleasantly surprised even into the letter T. But for my first album, we are going to Norway for a progressive and power metal band. It's their third studio album. They are Tomorrow's Outlook, and that album is Black Waves.
Yeah, this is one that I somehow missed through the playlist. Like I said, there was one video that had got hidden, so I don't know if there was a copyright issue or maybe they took it down, put it back up, whatever it may have been. But after listening to this album, it's like, man, this was really outstanding, really from beginning to end. I thought this was one of the stronger albums we've had in a while.
Yeah, it's hard to say what happened, because going from weeks where there were like 60 things on the list to over 100, I think by the time I got toward the end, it was just autopilot. So I eventually worked it all out, but yeah, this album is fantastic. This is a band that formed in 2007. They currently consist of Oyster K. Hansen on lead guitars, Tony Johansson on vocals, Andreas Stenseth on bass and songwriting, Tron Nicolaisen, he is the manager and co-songwriter, O.A. Lingval on drums, and Valentino Francavilla on guitars. You'd have to give this album a couple listens. I went to do research on it, and the first thing that I noticed was the producer, and he is Sasha Paith. Pretty notable dude. First, he's been the guitarist for Avantasia since 2007, but he's also worked with quite a few other bands, either as a musician or in production. Those bands include Angra, Gamma Ray, Rhapsody, Camelot, Luca Turilli, Shaman, Advance, Epica, Edguy, etc.
Wow.
So, yeah, the dude's kind of a big deal. There were a lot of really good releases this week, and among them, this one really stood out to me. I'm a fan of bands that kind of blend classic heavy metal with power metal, and I feel like that's kind of what these guys are doing here. Tony Johansson's vocals definitely have kind of a Bruce Dickinson feel, but also like early Jeff Tate thing going on. Mm-hmm. So I'm certainly a fan of that. I think it's the kind of music that would appeal to traditional metal fans, but it's not traditional metal.
Right.
It's not modern metal. It's just kind of that timeless European epic metal meets power metal, and I think there's always a place for that.
Yeah.
Standout tracks on the album include Eventide, Oceans of Sadness, Silver Ghost, Wait for the Sun, The Monument, and the track that we're going to listen to, the title track, Black Waves.
Check these guys out. This is Tomorrow's Outlook with their new album, Black Waves. This is the title track. It's the fourth track off this album. Let's listen to a little bit of that now. And, of course, YouTube Music decided to do whatever it was going to do. Decided to go back to the beginning of the album. So hang on.
Minute 6, I think.
Yep. Let me pull that up here just real quick. I need to start the track and then pause it and then get it right in the right spot. So good work, YouTube Music, for whatever that was all about. Let's try that again. Yeah, the Jeff Tate comparison, very apt there. It's not really, having only listened to it once, that didn't jump into my mind, but now that I hear it for the second time after you say that, it's definitely some tones there to that, which is always a good thing.
Yeah.
Jeff Tate, one of my all-time favorite metal singers. And again, I just, going through this album, it just went really fast. There wasn't really any weak tracks on it. At the same time, it didn't all sound the same, because that's the other extreme there. Like, it's like, do you have weak tracks because you're trying to do different things, or does it all sound like one giant song that you cut into like 10 pieces? Didn't feel like either one of those. It was really good. I really enjoyed this, and to me, it's the best of what modern power metal can do.
Yeah, and I think when you look at the track list and you look at the times of the songs, pretty much every song is over 5 minutes long. So that's kind of pushing the boundary of if you fail to kind of meet the moment and you have a tendency maybe to be too samey or just boring, at that 5 minute point, that's where you're going to start feeling it. And I didn't feel that way with these guys at all. Another weird, interesting thing, track 10 on the album, The Still, listed as an Aria cover. That is a Russian metal band. I tried to do a little research on them, but everything I found was in Cyrillic, and I was really confused. Let's see. Yeah, Aria. They're from started back in 1985. Now the official English translation of the band name is Aria, but if you look on the Metal Archives, this is what they're called. I'll just throw it in the chat, whatever that is.
Oh yeah, there you go.
So yeah, I didn't really get to dig further into that band, but they must be pretty good if these guys are covering them.
Makes me think of playing GeoGuessr, seeing signs in Cyrillic and trying to figure out what they're actually trying to say. But no, this was, like I said, this album was really good. One of my favorite ones, certainly of Mike's picks for the entire year. So definitely worth checking those guys out. Tomorrow's Outlook, definitely a strong pick for one of the top albums of early 2026. I have a pick as well, and we are checking out a band that, as I mentioned, started a while ago and then went away and then came back, and now kind of have changed their sound, but I think they have found something that's going to allow them to continue to go on strong. This is a band that's technically listed as a new wave of British heavy metal band, because that's how they got started, but now I would say more melodic AOR rock band from Durham, England. This is Darkheart with their new album, Evolution. They were formed in 1983, originally as the band Tokyo Rose. They released an album in 1984, Shadows of the Night, on Roadrunner Records. Had a lot of successful live shows, but unfortunately that was about the time where the new wave of British heavy metal started to fade. So the band decided to split up. And so they never got to release that second album, at least at the time. They were kind of a band that, as new wave of British heavy metal, as we have talked about on this podcast, kind of made a comeback, started to become popular again as people were going back and finding those bands. The band developed a cult following. So They did make a comeback with one of their founding members, Alan Clark, leading the way. The band themselves, the current iteration of the band is Alan Clark on vocals, keyboards, and backing vocals, Nick Catterick on guitars, keyboards, and backing vocals, and then listed as guest musicians, Josh Tabby Williams on bass, and Pete Newdeck on drums and backing vocals. This is a band that you still occasionally hear some of the new wave of British heavy metal in their sound, but it is very much more your melodic rock, your AOR rock. I think they have done this in a great way where the album feels very fresh and not dated. It doesn't feel like an old band trying to recapture a sound from the 80s and everything sounds like the 80s. Like, obviously it has a throwback element to it, but I think they did a really good job of making it something that sounds modern at the same time, which is something that's going to give them staying power going forward. Everything about this is great. I thought the vocals were outstanding. The harmonies were great. The music itself is really strong. It's another album that will just kind of blow by really quickly. I thought it was just really a great listen. I've listened to it a couple times already, and really enjoyed it from front to back, so definitely encourage you to check it out. Standout tracks include Light the Flame, Cold Winter, Hands of Fate, and the song we're going to listen to on the podcast, if YouTube Music cooperates, is Ride the Highway. Check these guys out. This is Darkheart with their new album, Evolution. This is the 6th track off of that album, Ride the Highway. Let's listen to a little bit of that now.
Because it's ice. Ride the highway where the sun will never shine. You're in it for a chance. The world will watch while you protest, but there is no way you can hide when you ride the highway.
I picked that song, obviously, because you still get all the good guitars and harmonies and stuff. But to me, as far as the tracks on the album, that was one of the ones that where you could feel a little bit of that new wave of British heavy metal influence in there. And I think that's kind of that perfect balance between that old style and something a little more new and a little more modern. But overall, they've got a great sound, and encourage you to check them out. Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, I thought this was another really strong one that I kind of felt like would end up being a pick one way or the other. I know we talked about these guys before a couple years ago. They had an album, Out of the Shadows, which might have been a re-release. I'd have to do more research on it. The logo looked familiar, and as did the name, so I'd have to go back and look more into what we talked about then. But yeah, just a really, really strong effort from these guys.
Yeah, for sure. This is the second album they've had since they've come back, so that's probably that other album that was re-released when they got picked up by their new label, I would guess. So, yeah, just great sound. These guys are doing great stuff, so definitely encourage you to check those guys out. We're going to have to run the rare second commercial during this episode. Don't want to run the risk of getting cut off in our thoughts on the Vault, because we've got a couple of great classic albums to talk about. So we're going to disappear for 90 more seconds on Twitch. If you're on YouTube, we'll hang out here and chat, and we'll be back in about 90 seconds to get to the Vault. So please stick around for that. And we are in the process of running them. We have run these commercials. Yeah, it's always encouraging to me to see these bands that started in the 80s and for whatever reason it either didn't work out or just, they had that one album and it's like, they just broke up, and then they get back together all these years later, and now they're kind of chugging along and doing good things. To me, that's really encouraging. That shows there's at least something there in the music industry now that's going to allow these guys to not only make new music, but to be able to maybe tour to support that music.
I think we've talked about in the past how it's now more cost effective for bands on their own to kind of create and promote their own music, but by that same token, it's the same for labels. It's you don't have to put tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars into an act to just say, hey, we're going to promote you guys online, socially, get your name out there. It doesn't have to be quite the gamble on their part.
Yeah.
I mean, there's probably less of an upside as there was back when metal was really huge, but at the same time, it's you can kind of decide how deep in the water you want to get.
Yeah, there's still an opportunity to make a decent living, I think. Yeah, you're probably not going to become a megastar now just because you don't have the machine behind you to push you out front. But at the same time, the machine isn't going to push you down either. Like, you can still make your albums. You can still tour your music. There are labels out there that we've talked about a lot on this podcast that support these bands, and we encourage you to support those labels. I think that's an encouraging sign for the industry as a whole that there is still room for bands that aren't radio airplay or legacy acts to be able to find a footing in the music industry.
Yeah, I think it's kind of the mantra that we have and kind of what we've talked about this whole time is that don't let other people decide what music you need to listen to. Go out and look for it yourself. We can tell you what we recommend, but it's really about finding all the new releases out there, and you'll eventually latch on to some bands that play the music you want to hear, and that's all you got to do.
Yep, 100%. So we're here to help, but yeah, you got to find your own stuff and support these bands as best you can. It's time to get into the vault where Mike and I will give you a couple of classic albums to check out, and Mike, of course, running through two gimmicks. Last week and next week, we'll continue his preview of Sonic Temple, which is coming on fast. It'll be here before you know it. If you haven't checked our social media, they do have set times released this week, so you can find out when some of these bands that Mike is talking about are going to play if they've piqued your interest. In between those, Mike's going through the years and finding some classic albums to talk about, whether they're formative albums of certain bands or just ones that Mike wants to catch up on. He's been going through year after year. I believe we're up to 73 this week, 1973. So a lot of interesting stuff from 1973. And, of course, I promised that I was going to go through and tell you what I picked. We'll do that in a moment. But in the meantime, why don't you tell me what you have picked for 1973?
Let's see. You picked Billy Joel's Piano Man.
Okay, well, that's a pretty solid choice.
So kind of going through the list of 1973 in music on Wikipedia, we had some pretty big debuts that year, including Aerosmith, which their debut got re-released recently. So, if I wanted to check that out, I could definitely get hold of that pretty easily. Bachman Turner Overdrive released their self-titled debut, as did a little band called Queen.
Nice.
Yeah, so definitely could have gone with any of the big debuts. Other notable releases, we have Deep Purple's Who Do We Think We Are, Alice Cooper's $1 Billion Babies, Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon.
Wow.
Which I almost picked only because I've never listened to it.
I have. I have also listened to that with The Wizard of Oz, and, I was not under the influence of any substances. To me, there is a little something there. I don't know if it's enough to say that really is a thing, but it is, as far as albums go of the 70s, I think it's one that everybody does need to listen to because overall it's a really good release.
Would you ever consider, if you were in a band, just making every album line up to some movie and just find out if people figure it out?
100%.
And just like the most off-the-wall movies?
Yeah, I would definitely, I would find some movies. I mean, what a great way to get it, like, inspiration to write your music, too. Because, now you've got a little guideline to kind of ride along with.
It's like, Mike, your debut album syncs up perfectly to My Cousin Vinny.
Why not?
Absolutely it does. Why wouldn't it?
Sure.
One of the greatest movies of all time. Plan on doing my Wayne's World album next. Moving on. ELO released ELO 2. King Crimson released Lark's Tongue and Aspic. Led Zeppelin released Houses of the Holy. Eagles released Desperado.
Wow, yeah.
David Bowie with Aladdin Sane. Jethro Tull with A Passion Play. Styx 2 came out. Golden Earring released Moonton, which is their 9th studio album and the one with Radar Love. So
okay.
They were 9 albums in before Radar Love came out.
That's crazy.
These dudes have been around forever. Admittingly, I've only heard of 2 of their songs, Radar Love and Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
I think Twilight Zone didn't come out till like their 16th album, so they
just plug it away until they got their hits.
And it's funny because when you hear those 2 songs, they feel like just eras apart as far as just sound-wise.
Yep.
Genesis Selling England by the Pound, which I've listened to before, so I didn't pick that. The Who's Quadrophenia. Alice Cooper also released Muscle of Love. We got Black Sabbath with Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, and ELO with another album that year as well on the 3rd day. Some of those bands were really churning out releases. What I ended up going with was the second studio album from a Long Island-based hard rock band. Most people probably know them from the hits Don't Fear the Reaper, Godzilla, Burnin' For You. They are Blue Oyster Cult, and the album is Tyranny and Mutation.
Speaking of another group that's been around forever.
Yeah.
Like some of those hits I think you mentioned were definitely not in 1973. They were much later. So
I think Don't Fear the Reaper was 76, and Burnin' For You wasn't until maybe like 80 or sometime after.
So they another group that, just kept chugging along until they got those commercial hits that certainly put them in a different stratosphere financially, at least.
And that's kind of the interesting thing too when you pick an album that predates the hits, because you kind of hear like traces of the DNA that would kind of make those hits later on in the earlier work, and that's definitely the case with these guys. Blue Oyster Cult originally formed back in 1967. Their first name, the name of their band was originally Soft White Underbelly. Apparently they continued using that name even after that, after they changed it, whenever they would do like secret shows in clubs throughout the UK and US, so that's pretty cool. The name actually came from a quote by Winston Churchill in reference to Italy being the soft underbelly of the Axis.
Yeah.
History lesson there. It's pretty cool. A bad review from a 1969 show led to the first of many band name changes, this time to Owazaka, then to Stalk Forest Group, then Santos Sisters. Then eventually they agreed upon Blue Oyster Cult. The band members also at one point took on pseudonyms, with only Don Roser, the lead guitarist and vocalist, keeping his. He still to this day kind of goes by the name Buck Dharma, which I've heard of. I've heard of that name. I've not heard of his real name, so that tells you something.
Mm-hmm.
In 1971, they released their, with their name solidified, they had their name solidified by 1971. 72, they released their self-titled debut. Then a year later, here we are in 1973, they would release Tyranny and Mutation. This band did have a pretty consistent lineup through the 70s, with Buck Dharma on lead guitars and vocals, Eric Bloom on vocals and rhythm guitar and synthesizers, Alan Lanier on keyboards and rhythm guitar, Joe Bouchard on bass guitar, keyboards, and vocals, and Albert Bouchard on drums and vocals. Dharma's the only actual original member, but Bloom joined in 1969, is still in the band, and has been on every Blue Oyster Cult release, so they have the guitars and vocal side of it pretty much solid from day one.
Yeah, it's crazy how much continuity they had from the get-go, really.
Anytime you have dudes who are clearly prominent members, important members that have stayed together that long, that's definitely admirable. This year kind of gave me a chance to pick a band that was still kind of finding their sound. Like, this isn't the album with their hits on it, and that's totally fine. The album did have one single, Hot Rails to Hell, failed to chart. The album itself reached 122 on the Billboard 200 chart. So these guys were certainly still climbing at this point. It wasn't until 1976's album, Agents of Fortune, where you'd find Don't Fear the Reaper. Looking at the reviews on the album, some contemporary reviews, Gordon Fletcher from Rolling Stone gave it a rave review, calling Blue Oyster Cult one of the best bands that America has. Mike Saunders from Phonograph Record referred to the album as a real disappointment, definitely inferior to their debut album and lacking the sort of brashness that almost defines hard rock or metal music. Wikipedia has a few other reviews, but man, some of the words and some of the descriptions they gave are just so abstract. You're like, what normal person talks about music this way? It does mention, though, that modern reviews have been generally positive, which isn't too surprising. I mentioned before, I don't have a huge wealth of knowledge about these guys coming in. I knew the songs Don't Fear the Reaper, Godzilla, Burning for You, Astronomy. You hear kind of early signs of the riffs that would later be used in a song like Godzilla. Tracks like Wings Wetted Down kind of has that occult rock vibe that makes you think of Don't Fear the Reaper and kind of what set these guys apart. And, considering the first four albums I picked were from UK bands, it's kind of cool to finally get some American representation in my vault, so definitely excited about that. This album felt way more like proto-hard rock than progressive metal or progressive rock. That some of the earlier picks that I had kind of had that sound going for them. Feels more like Deep Purple than King Crimson, I would say. Mm-hmm. Definitely worth giving the album a shot. Like everything else I've listened to so far, it's aged really well and just kind of gives you a glimpse of where these guys are heading. So from a historical perspective, always cool to hear. Standout tracks on the album include OD'd on Life Itself, Hot Rails to Hell, 7 Screaming Disbusters, Wings Wetted Down, and Mistress of the Salmon Salt. But yeah, that's Blue Oyster Cult's Tyranny and Mutation.
Yeah, they're, as I feel like I say this every time you go through a band like this, is another one of those bands that I feel like I haven't given enough listen to their non-hits and their albums. So kind of cool to see you pick a band like that, because I think it is good, as I've kind of learned with my Vault gimmick, to kind of see how the band got to where they were when they had their hits. Like, it should be a natural progression to get to that point.
And I feel like this band's also kind of timely in that when Ghost kind of hit the scene, there were so many comparisons with Ghost to Blue Oyster Cult, kind of that. It wasn't really metal, it was a cult rock.
Yeah.
Like, but no, I'm excited to hear more from these guys. One other kind of weird thing about this album that they mention on Wikipedia is that this is the only album in their catalog to include the definite article, the, in the band's name.
Yeah.
Everything else is just Blue Oyster Cult, but this album is billed as the Blue Oyster Cult.
Yeah, I thought that was weird when I saw the album art, but just definitely a band that did it their way for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, good stuff, though.
Yeah, interesting stuff. So definitely check that out if you're a fan of Blue Oyster Cult or you want to see some of their older stuff. I'm going through a gimmick in the vault where we are going through all the albums of one of my favorite bands of all time, and we are spending the last week on the prog version of this band. Of course, the band is Journey. We are going to be talking about their third album this week, the 1977 release. Next, it is the last album to feature the band members on the cover, and they're featured very prominently on the cover of this album. This is, again, if you are a fan of prog rock and you have not checked out Journey's first 3 albums, you've done yourself a significant disservice. I think as far as prog rock goes, that feels very much in the vein of making art as opposed to making money. These albums are really good. I don't think there are a lot of hits or singles off of these first 3 albums, but if you just want four or 5 guys who are just at the top of their game, musically coming together and making these songs, I think that's what you're going to find this era of Journey. Of course, I am tier listing all of these. We'll get to that in a moment where this one falls. Obviously, same lineup as the previous album. You have Greg Rowley on lead vocals and keyboards. It'll be the last album where he is the primary vocalist. Neil Sean on lead guitars and vocals. Ross Valerie on bass guitar, piano, and vocals. And Ainsley Dunbar on drums. It is, as I mentioned, last one to feature Rowley as the primary lead singer. Last one to feature the band members on the cover. The singles were Spaceman and Nickel and Dime. Not necessarily memorable, but good songs. Again, if you're in the kind of prog era, that neither one of them charted in any way, but both very solid. The album itself reached number 85 on the Billboard 200 charts. Also got to number 47 in Sweden. Right after, or as this album was coming out, the band did hire a lead vocalist, and it was not Steve Perry, who was going to go on to be their vocalist. It was Robert Fleischman, who some people may know. He was the first singer of the band Vinnie Vincent Invasion. So that was kind of where he went after leaving Journey. It was just kind of a falling out with like an agent or something like that caused him to not stick around, and they ended up getting Steve Perry before their next album. He would share vocal duties with Rowley during some of the live shows to support this album. It says all the songs on the album have vanished from the band's live set list after 1979, and 2 of the songs, Spaceman and Here We Are, have never been performed live. Again, not terribly shocking. Reviews are mixed. All Music, again, 2 out of 5, but if you go to the user reviews, they're overwhelmingly positive. Collector's Guide to Heavy Metal gave it an 8 out of 10, and the Rolling Stone Album Guide gave it a 2 out of 5. From the All Music review, Stephen Thomas Erlewine wrote that, quote, without a forceful lead vocalist like Steve Perry, the group lacks focus and a pop sensibility, and its attempts at straight-laced pop rock suffer considerably as a result. Canadian journalist Martin Popoff praised the album's variety and the profusion of good songs, with the musical styles ranging from prog to sophisticated balladry to prog metal. what's interesting, I read a review on AllMusic that kind of talked about the second side of the album being a little more rock and a little less prog. And I went back and re-listened to the album after I read that comment, and I would agree, like the second half of the album is definitely a little more just straightforward hard rock with prog elements, as opposed to prog rock that occasionally rocks a little bit harder. But again, if you're a prog rock fan, you're missing out if you haven't checked out these 3 albums. I think they were all really well done. I think this one, from a would I go back and listen to it again, is probably the least likely of the 3, because there really wasn't any kind of singles that like bring you back. But I would say it is the best album of the 3 as far as just the quality of the music, the way the songs are composed, the musicianship is at a top level. You can tell that everybody in the band is ready for what's about to happen as far as like their ability to play music. I don't know how ready they were for the dramatic change that's about to happen in this band starting in 1978 with the album Infinity. Standout tracks include I Would Find You, Hustler, Next, and Nickel and Dime. I think you definitely need to check it out. I did do a tier list. Coming into this album, we have this tier list, and it basically listed those first 2 albums as excellent musicianship, but probably limited re-listens. And as you might guess from my review, this one falls into that category as well. I don't know how often I'll be listening to these again. It's funny that they kind of come up on my YouTube Music now, and I will occasionally listen to a track or 2, but, you know, it doesn't. They weren't writing songs for me to re-listen to them, so mission accomplished. But I just think it's just very much guys just playing music and doing it at a high level, but not necessarily in a way to make a ton of money. But they have kind of put themselves in position where they're really just missing one key piece to really take off, and they're going to pick that piece up before their next album in 1978. I'm definitely interested in what that's going to sound like. But this journey, so to speak, has been very interesting because the catalog of those 3 albums could be from any band, and you could give me 10 guesses, and I would never guess these 3 albums came from Journey, except that I looked them up and knew that they were Journey. It just totally blew my mind.
It's kind of funny. You think like the first few albums, they're like, we have to prove that we really have the chops. And then once you get through that, it's like, okay, now we can write hits.
Yeah.
Let's go that route.
Yeah.
You know, it is kind of interesting with these guys because obviously their next 3 albums, you got Infinity, Evolution, and Departure. Then they just randomly do a soundtrack for a Japanese movie and like kind of go back to their roots.
Yeah.
That's so fascinating.
Yeah, and I don't know, because the one thing I'm hoping I'll learn as I go through the rest of these albums is kind of how the everything is kind of weaved their way through. Like, how much of the old sound were they able to keep around as a compromise to the guys in the band that had been there that maybe didn't want to go full sellout? Was that Japanese album a compromise to do an album like that was kind of a throwback, or was that what they were asking for, so that's why they wrote it? Like, it's going to be interesting to me to see how that path winds through, because again, I still know these guys as the greatest hits band. I know there are hits on this next album. What does the rest of the album sound like? Yeah. How does it kind of progress? Because it's going to be really fascinating.
Yeah, and honestly, I think if you found a good mix of the 2 styles, I think that could still be really good rock music. You know, you mentioned Vinnie Vincent and Robert Fleischman. He's actually back with Vinnie Vincent Invasion, oddly enough.
Fantastic.
Yeah, there was a big thing about Vincent releasing a new album, and it was like comically expensive or something. I haven't watched the videos, but I've been recommended videos on it. You know, notable as far as Vinnie Vincent Invasion goes, you know, after he got rid of Fleischman the first time, he brought in a guy, Mark Slaughter. Mark Slaughter, and then also Dana Strum was in the band on bass guitar. So obviously that was kind of the precursor to them splitting from Vincent, because he's apparently difficult to work with. They split off from Vincent and formed Slaughter. So, you know.
Who'd have guessed Slaughter was some sort of weird lineage from Journey?
Yeah,
like,
who knew? I mean, I'd like to hear Mark Slaughter sing some Journey tunes. I think he would do really well with that. Dude's a great singer, but yeah, when you threw out Robert Fleischman and Vinnie Vincent, I was just like, wow, how about that?
The strange crazy path that music takes.
It's
what makes this podcast so much fun, because you find stuff like that. It's like, I had no idea that that's kind of how it all weaved in and out. And we're going to probably find more of that as we go forward.
Oh,
with
for
this,
sure.
Because I think they're bringing in a producer for 1978's album that is going to be known for working with some of these bands that have made big hits. So really interesting stuff. We'll get back to Journey in 2 weeks. Of course, next week we'll be going back to the one-hit wonders, and we're going to be checking out a song that probably you know, but maybe you don't know the version that I'm going to be talking about next week in 1971. So you'll have to tune in to find out what that song is. But it is time to wrap up this edition of the Hard Rock Empire. This was a long one. It's been a while since we've gone an hour. Thank you so much for tuning in and staying with us through the whole program. But this was just a jam-packed week, so we wanted to bring it all to you, and we brought it to you a little early this week. So we appreciate you sticking around. We'll be back next week, normal time, 7 o'clock Eastern next Sunday night. The music of April the 3rd will be on the agenda for next week, so we hope that you'll join us for that. Big thanks to Chris for joining us in the chat. Big thanks to Mike, as always, for his hard work on the podcast. Big thanks to Stove Leg Media for their continued support of the podcast, and a big thanks to you for listening whenever and wherever you're listening to the Hard Rock Empire. We'll join you again next Sunday night for another episode of the Hard Rock Empire. Until then, don't forget to join the Empire, the Hard Rock Empire.